Hello, everyone. Welcome back to SRAP Live. We are here with an important panel. We are going to be talking about biogas and is it really green? So we are here with some very knowledgeable people, which I will introduce now. We have Jim Walsh with us. Jim is the Renewable Energy Policy Analyst for Food and Water Watch. Jim provides policy guidance and support to local, state, and national policy campaigns that help to ensure a just transition to 100% true renewable energy by 2035. We also have with us Lynn Henning. Lynn is a regional representative at SRAP. Lynn is also a family farmer. She farms 300 acres of corn and soybeans in Michigan. And she has, within 10 miles of their residence, 12 CAFOs. Lynn has been working to stop pollution from factory farms, to hold state and federal agencies accountable by enforcing laws. Lynn is also the 2010 Goldman Environmental Prize winner, which is a great honor. And we have also with us Caroline Farrell. Caroline Farrell is the executive director of the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment, and she's based in Delano, California. Caroline has represented low-income communities, communities of color, and she does this in the capacity on land use issues related to dairy development, hazardous waste facilities, ethanol plant siting, and long-range community plan. I am Maria Payan, and I'm a regional representative with SRAP. We are also going to be bringing in Phoebe Gittleson after our panel to go through a PowerPoint, which can be downloaded and saved. So let's get started, and we're going to direct our first question to Jim. So, Jim, can you give us an overview on what biogas is? Biogas is being classified as a green energy. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yes, well, thank you very much for having me here today, Maria. I greatly appreciate it. And this is a really important issue. And I think some important background is really to recognize that most food animals in the United States are grown and raised in highly concentrated factory farms. And vast amounts of waste those animals produce poses a huge environmental and public health threat. And historically, farmers used animal manure as fertilizer. But these factory farms produce far more manure than could be used responsibly on local fields. And the over-application of manure leads to runoff from agricultural fields into waterways. And the runoff can damage and alter ecosystems and contribute to algae blooms, dead zones, impacting fish and recreation, and also impacting public health. And rather than addressing the factory farming model that's creating this unsustainable waste stream, the industry is seeking to monetize their waste, calling it renewable energy, biogas, biomethane, renewable natural gas. And all of these names sound better than manure gas or factory farm gas. But at the end of the day, that's what it is. And their attempts to monetize their waste can actually make the problem worse while hiding and greenwashing their unsustainable model of raising animals for food. And, factory farms are producing 13 times more waste than the entire human population in the United States. And even factory farms that safely manage manure during methane, during this process, the process of digesting waste can actually make nutrient loads in the manure worse. They don't actually get rid of the nutrient loads, the nitrogen and phosphorus. They just extract the methane from the manure. And this can actually, in the instance of poultry, which we're discussing in the context of Delaware, they actually add water to the waste, which can actually increase the total volume of waste, making the problem worse. And, these factory farms that use these digesters have the same problems of waste disposal that they've always had, of spreading the digested manure as fertilizer that can lead to runoff and application. And actually, the process of digestion makes certain nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus more water soluble meaning that rainwater is more likely to wash those nutrients into nearby streams. And so what these factory farms do is it can look at it in different ways, but they essentially are taking manure and putting it into an enclosed container. Sometimes it's a lagoon with a cover on it. Sometimes it's an actual container that the waste goes into. And they create an environment where they have anaerobic environment, which is one without oxygen. And that allows specific bacteria to thrive that when they break down the manure, creates methane. And that methane then can be used to burn and create energy. Now, this biogas that they want to call it, factory farm gas, releases methane or releases greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and other pollutants, including nitrogen oxide, ammonia, hydrogen sulfide. Some of these are really dangerous and unhealthy contaminants. And the methane infrastructure from these digesters and the rest of the system can also leak. It can spill. It can explode. And so it's really not clean nor safe energy. But the natural gas industry is pushing this renewable gas narrative to justify the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure and greenwash fracking. And the factory farm industry is more than happy to go along with this, trying to pose their waste stream as a solution to the climate crisis, when actually what we're seeing is it's making the problem worse. And so I think that one thing that's very important to recognize with this industry, and as they're talking about this industry is heavily subsidized. And the subsidies come in a variety of different forms. Some of these subsidies are direct. Some of these subsidies are indirect. You have direct subsidies where the government will actually give grants, low interest loans, or tax breaks to factory farms to build these digesters, which is a direct subsidy. But you also have indirect subsidies where states will require utilities to include a certain percentage of renewable natural gas, this factory farm gas, in their energy mix. And then those costs are passed on to ratepayers. And there's also other subsidies that exist in these indirect subsidies and cap and trade and offset programs like we see with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And those allow utilities to literally purchase credits from factory farm digesters to meet their climate goals, rather than actually reducing emissions from their power plants and shifting towards clean energy. And so where we're seeing this tremendous investment in infrastructure that's actually perpetuating this unsustainable factory farming model, as well as expanding and sustaining this unsustainable model of fracking and gas development, rather than diverting those resources to real clean energy solutions and real solutions to help create more sustainable food production. And so we need to move away from these sources, and digesters are actually making things worse and moving us and continuing to move us in an unsustainable direction for food production and energy production.
Thank you for that, Jim. And I'm glad that you brought up Delaware. We are facing here a really major project where there's a company, Bioenergy Dev Company, which is trying to put in a facility and bypassing public participation through the county, which is, it's really been disappointing to see that the way that they have tried to eliminate public participation and kind of reroute the process to push it along. We have concerns here because we are talking about bringing in waste from the entire Delmarva region. So waste from other states. We have a lot of problems here with our water quality. And I think the concerns you bring up are valid. So I want to go over to Lynn, because Lynn has done some really interesting research on biogas and the Wisconsin CAPOs. Lynn, what are some of the significant findings?
Thank you for having me, Maria. This is a real honor. SRAP's recent research of the California Cap and Trade program shows a lot of different things, and I'll point out a few of them. Right now, there's currently 15 Wisconsin facilities that benefit from the Cap and Trade program, but 10 of these facilities have experienced numerous manure spills, and many are built over or near waterways, which may cause a higher increase or risk. There has been 1.3 million California Air Board credits issued to the Wisconsin facilities just from 2013 through 2020. Since 2001, they've had over 500,000 gallons of manure spilled in Wisconsin, with 104 violations or discharges from 2004 through 2019. And 96 of those have occurred while the operations were receiving carbon credits. One of the biggest issues is the dairy herd expansions in Wisconsin at 15 facilities has increased over 15,000 animals since the facilities registered for California carbon credits. Another 4 facilities are proposing to expand another 2,700 animals. Expansion of these operations is contributing to production of more animal waste with more potential for environmental pollution, increased air emissions, water use, water pollution, and then also the land application of digester effluent compared with fresh manure is a higher risk for both ground and surface water. Compounds, phosphorus, nitrogen, other elements become more soluble due to the digestion process, and then they have a higher potential to move with water during rainstorms or land application and going through, cracks in the soil, through holes in the ground, macropore holes to the waterways. And then one of the biggest issues is the lack of accountability in the administration of public and private programs that pay for these manure to energy projects. And I wanted to give a couple examples. Pagels Ponderosa Dairy commenced with the California Air Board in 2009, but they didn't even get an air permit until 2017. Since they started in 2009, they've increased their herd by 3,539 animal units while receiving over 105,000 carbon credits. They've had 17 manure spills totaling 66,000 gallons with 3 permit implementation violations also. Wacker Dairy is another example. In 2012, they commenced with the California Air Board program. They increased from 2,240 animals to 2,940 animal units and proposed to increase another 2,372 animal units, which would bring a total of 4,612 animal units. They've had 7 manure spills totaling 100,500 gallons while receiving 46,000, almost 500 credits from the California Air Board, which the increase with the expansion, again, like I said, will increase more manure output, more emissions, and more high potential for discharges and violations.
So I want to follow that up with another question before moving on to Caroline. So you did this research. How does this compare to how the industry operates on the East Coast?
I'd have to say the only difference is that the East Coast has more poultry, while Wisconsin and California has more dairies. Manure digesters are expensive to build, operate, maintain. CAFO owners pay for them with grants, cost share agreements from the states, federal programs, utility companies with money ultimately coming from the public. So the public is paying the bills for the digesters. However, the CAFO industry keeps all the profits by offsetting operation costs by selling the energy to the utility companies and selling their claimed air pollution reductions to other polluters. And I want to give a few examples of that funding. Grants such as the Rural Energy for America program. In some cases, federal grant money is provided to individual states for administration. Grants do not require any repayment, so they never have to repay those. Cost sharing arrangements do not require repayment. The USDA NRCS Environmental Quality Incentives Program is an example of the cost share program. Loan guarantees is another. Under federal or state loan guarantees, the public agency guarantees full repayment of the loan. Loan guarantees typically offer lower financing and interest rates. And then you have different things such as the Section 9003 Biorefinery, Renewable Chemical, and Bio-Based Product Manufacturing and Assistance Program. And one other one is industrial revenue bonds. They raise capital by issuing bonds that are used to build or buy a facility like a digester system. A bond is a fixed income investment set for a defined period using either a variable or a fixed interest rate. So the public is paying and financing these digesters.
And we're going to come back, but I want to move over to Caroline.
To kind of push back.
So thank you so much for that. And now we are going to continue this with a presentation from Phoebe Gibbelson. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to continue now with our biogas panel and answering the question, is it really green? With us, we have Phoebe Gibbelson, who is in her final year at CUNY School of Law, where she's focusing on environmental justice. Phoebe has been doing a lot of research on biogas. And with that, I am going to turn it over to you because they really want to see what you have to say. And then we'll come back.
Thank you, Maria. All right. Well, hello, everyone. To continue on Maria's point, today I am going to walk us through these false promises of manure digesters and why farmers are being sold this solution to such a polluting industry like factory farming and what is wrong with biogas in general. Next slide, please. So just to give you an overview of where we're going to go today, I'm going to quickly talk about big agriculture and what that means, manure digesters, how they function, biogas, why it isn't green, and then how all of these things continue to act as systemic oppression for the communities that are living fence line to these polluting industries, specifically in environmental justice communities, which are predominantly communities of color and low-income communities. And if we have time, we'll talk about policy suggestions. So there's a lot to dive into and a lot to work through. So let's go to the next slide. So I love to start with the big picture with any. So when we think about a farm, where we get our food and what we tell kids about where their food comes from, we think of the photo on the left. We think of animals free in a pasture and enjoying Mother Nature and really living their best lives and, being safe and not polluting, not part of a polluting entity. But the truth is 95% of our food comes from the photo on the right, which is an image of what I would say the most beautiful CAFO I've ever seen. But CAFOs stand for the Concentrated Animal Feeding Operations, also known as Animal Feeding Operations or AFOs, and are highly polluting operations with numerous health hazards stemming from pesticide spray and runoffs and water contamination from manure. So, the industry that we're looking at is inherently it's not equitable, it is not sustainable, and it is not healthy. So I just wanted to highlight that before we dive into what manure digesters are. So next slide, please. So this infographic is one of my favorites. It's from Winona Hodder's Foodopoly book. And I just think it really highlights the inequities that are inherent in our food system. So if you look on the left, you'll see what the corporations own. And if you look on the right, you'll see what the growers own. Tyson, Purdue, JD, can go on and on, Smithson, and they, all of these things that you see on the left, the farmer on the right has to buy to even opt in to this industry. So when you see on the right that they have this debt, it's not just a little debt, like it's really hard work to make a profit in this system that we have created for all. It is not actually for all. It really just profits the corporations. So, and we see that here. What are the farmers left with? They have debt. They have their infrastructure of barns. They have to pay for labor, cost of utilities, and are left with a lot of manure and dead carcasses. So, how much manure are we talking about here, and why is that relevant? Next slide. So, it's a lot of manure. As you can see here, the system creates a lot of manure because CAFOs are very large animal farm operations where the animals are confined. So here's some different examples of waste management practices that are industry standard. On the bottom left, you have hog farm lagoons. So the big purple areas that you see, those are all manure. Above that, in the top left, you see dairy farm waste management technique where you're taking the liquid poop and shoveling it down. And then on the into storage. And then on the far right, you see a poultry farm manure pile with the tractor, because, this is not just after a whole year. This is how it looks every day. And then on the bottom right, you see that manure being sprayed onto a field. So, animal factory waste contains antibiotics, hormones, pathogens, heavy metals, and other animal drugs that cause algal blooms and extremely unsanitary drinking water sources. The Geological Survey has said that manure from animal factories contaminates water quality all across our country. So there's so much wrong with the system already that we wonder why we would want to take this waste and bring it into a new industry, right? So let's think about it. If you were a farmer, you had all this waste on your hands, and someone came up to you and said, "Hey, I can help you make this lucrative." Like you wouldn't walk away. You'd say, "Oh, tell me more. Like, what is this, and how can it help me?" So next slide, please. We're going to get into what it is. So before we get into what manure digesters are, I just want to remind everyone that biogas and renewable natural gas are just cleaner sounding names for the same old climate destroying methane. So like we've seen with natural gas and fracking, like this is not the solution. We do not need hydraulic fracking. We do not need extra plastic in our planet. We need to have a just transition to a more sustainable future that is using clean and renewable energy. Next slide, please. So this is a wonderful little chart that really shows what is going on with manure digesters. So a manure digester is really the infrastructure that houses anaerobic digester systems. So that's the anaerobic digestion is really what we're talking about when we're talking about manure digesters. And that creates energy from manure. So when anaerobic digestion converts organic material from sources such as animal manure or food waste or sewage sludge into biogas, which can then be used to produce electricity. As you can see in this chart here, most of the time, depending on what kind of farm you have and what kind of manure you're using, the biogas needs to be refined before it can get to the grid, before it can be used as fuel. You have to refine what they call the liquid effluent or the post-processing solid, as you can see in this grid. So, not only are manure digesters costly, often exceeding millions of dollars, they're really difficult to manage dealing with methane is extremely temperamental, and the process through anaerobic digestion, it pollutes harmful chemicals into local communities, and the intensity of that pollution is really dependent on what kind of waste is going in to the actual digester. So we'll get into that in a bit. All right, next slide, please. So here are some photos of manure digesters. I just thought it would be helpful for you guys to visualize like what this is. And we're talking about manure digesters for operations, factory farm operations and industry. This isn't just for one farm where the manure on your farm, on your small family farm, is being used to produce energy. This is an operation. And it's important to highlight that because the farmers aren't sold that part of the story. They're really told that this is, hey, we're going to you can get this thing on your farm. We're going to turn your manure into energy, and it's great. It's not a big deal. But actually, it is a really big deal. If you look at the bottom right photo, it shows you exactly what we just saw in the grid. I mean, in the flow chart right here in person, and what that looks like on a farm. So you have this large digester. You have to store the biogas before it gets into the pipeline. You have the scrubber, which is it's what refines the liquid effluent or the manure that comes out that might be turned into fertilizer or bedding. You have to refine it. So that's the scrubber. Then you have the storage tank, the pumping room, and truck entrance, because the renewable natural gas ends up being trucked out and used as electricity and other fuels. So, these aren't small operations. This isn't just something that you're installing on your farm. The gas industry has an inherent incentive to convince farmers to invest in manure digesters to process biogas from waste into this pipeline grade renewable natural gas, because it's often the developers who bring farmers the capital, and then they own the digesters while the farmers are renting their lagoons to provide the manure and in return for a cut of the power sold. But really, it's very rare that manure digesters end up meeting the breaking even. I'll say that again because I kind of messed that up. But it's it's very rare that farmers actually see any success in making money from manure digesters, because so often that they're overproducing to even produce a little bit of gas to try and make back the capital costs of investing in the manure digester. Next slide, please. So here's just another example of anaerobic digestion and the different infrastructure that you might be seeing on your farm or your factory farm operation when this idea is being sold to you. As you can see, this is very complex. You need to understand chemistry. You need to understand science. You're turning something that is used as an organic compound that's just a natural thing into something that's highly refined to be used as a fuel. So again, the industry is trying to take something that's already polluting and already harming communities and dressing that up as a composting solution. But really, this manure digester greenwashing is just leading to entrenching these factory farms with biogas pipelines and creating a whole new fuel epicenter in these rural towns that they do not need. We need to be shifting away from these harmful practices. We don't need to continue to rely on factory farming. I want to highlight again that these developers are falsely motivating farmers, and they're misrepresenting the feasibility and the cost of production. And the manure digesters are just extremely expensive and temperamental, and the costs are rarely recovered, especially when taking into consideration how much it costs to construct and also the operating costs. So yes, the developer might come in and provide the money for the manure digester, but they're not providing the money for your regulation of the methane and how hot it should be, and whether your manure is liquidy enough, or if it's, if you need to flare the gas from it. All of those things aren't really sold to the farmer in their pitch. This is going to make you some money. So next slide, please. Okay, so how does this all play out? So the profit potential of a digester and generator critically depends on the quantity and quality of the manure that the anaerobic digester is processing. So here's a fact. Of the 259 anaerobic digesters in the U.S., according to the EPA's AgStar database, only 4 use poultry manure and litter. Why? Because digesting poultry can be very operationally challenging, and they're really not in use today because the poultry manure has to be converted into a more liquid manure to even be successful at creating biomethane. So if you're a poultry farmer and the developers are trying to sell you a manure digester, it's not as an easy sell as going to a dairy farmer, because the manure that comes out of a cow is a little bit different than the manure that comes out of a chicken. So in this case, if we're just thinking about, how does that impact the local community? And like, what does this really mean, right? Like, let me give you a real example here. So almost 384 million gallons of water have to be used in a year just to liquefy poultry waste to get it going into manure digestion to create biogas. So it takes, here it's on the slide, but it takes 3,836 gallons of water to dilute 1 ton of poultry manure from its initial moisture content, it's not very moist, to more liquefied content of 94%. Because what you're putting in gets heated up, you create the biogas, comes out, refine it so it can go in the, or you can, use it for other purposes like fertilizer and bedding. So when you're thinking about poultry, you're wasting almost 384 million gallons of water just to liquefy something to make gas that isn't worth that much. Water is such an issue. Water rights are such an issue in our country, and wasting 384 million of water just to turn a certain manure into a more liquefied manure to create a little bit of gas is not sustainable whatsoever. It is not a green solution. We are wasting water, and we are not being safe, because the ammonia levels in poultry litter are extremely toxic to local communities, especially when we're considering and measuring the amount of different chemicals that are in the manure in the first place. So the concentrations of ammonia in the poultry litter are very problematic to anaerobic digestion processes and the local community. And this is just one example of like how clear it is that this isn't a green solution when you're wasting 384 million gallons of water a year just to put that into the system. It just doesn't feel right. Next slide. So manure digesters do not generate better farming practices. I hope that if that's the only thing you take away from today, you can spread the word that this is a false promise to farmers. The anaerobic digesters are only solving problems that were created by large scale factory farming in the first place. So problems that are avoided in more sustainable agriculture systems, such as pasture-based and regenerative agriculture, they don't have these problems. They don't need these solutions. So manure methane is really only one component of the total CAFO greenhouse gas emissions. There's so many other polluting toxins and hazards that come out of these factory farms. It's really unethical to try and drape such a problematic system with another polluting entity. the production of biomethane from manure digesters, it really locks farmers into more debt, and it perpetuates the expansion of the current standard harmful practices while expanding fossil fuel infrastructure, because they're creating the need for biogas, connecting it back to CAFOs, and therefore, would argue that we need CAFOs so we can have biogas, but really we don't need either. Next slide. So what does this mean for farmers? It's really tough. Farmers do not have the support they need in our policy and in our laws. There's really not many options. And I know everyone is just trying their best. And this might seem like a solution when you're dealing with the already very stressful role of managing a CAFO and having the manure on your land. But it's important that we recognize this is not a solution for communities, farmers, for our planet. This is really just putting more money in the pockets of the corporations that are already poisoning our communities, our food systems, and our planet. Next slide, please. So I just want to talk about policy briefly, because one of the things that I found in research, which I found so interesting, is that in California, they have this cap and trade program, and farmers can opt in if they have a manure digester to get offset credits. Whereas New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, also known as the CLCPA, which was passed last year, they are banning manure to energy projects. So why is one state subsidizing this manure digester to farmer biogas plan where another state, New York, is completely banning this? And I think that's an interesting moment in our time, in these crazy times, to really think about like how our local communities in New York organize to ban this, because they know that it is a false promise, and they know that this is not the solution. And in California, the incentives are there because the capitalist society and our capitalist economy really relies on transportation in California. So when we're thinking about California and the revenue there, their offset credits from the digesters are supposed to be invested back into these communities, but we have found that they're not. Whereas the CLCPA completely prohibits waste to energy and biofuels, because they know that when we're using it at a large scale for energy transportation purposes, it is not the manure to energy kind of recycled path that it's sold. It's then entrenching a neighborhood or a community in fossil fuel infrastructure and bringing in diesel trucks and different pipelines, and just not helping our goals for a just transition and to help future generations. So what else can we do besides look at state policy and figure out who is leading in our fight against manure digesters? We need to make sure that the government supports and subsidizes for soil health and not just exploitation. So much of our farm bills are really set up to trap farmers in big agriculture with subsidies and insurance and incentives for certain kind of farming, which is the CAFO model, which we just looked at. It doesn't really support, subsidize, or insure farmers for regenerative agricultural practices or more maintaining soil health. So I'm sure you've read these by now as I'm yapping away on the screen. Here are just some ideas that I'm exploring for how we can help farmers and help local communities. So many of these CAFOs that are applying for these manure digester permits are already violating the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. So they're not in compliance. They're already polluting communities. And now they're going to get a permit to continue polluting. Like, that doesn't seem right. We really need to make sure that people that are getting my tax dollars, these government subsidies, are actually in compliance before they expand their operations. We need to expand funding for existing federal conservation programs. In California, they have the Healthy Soils program, and there's so many wonderful farms that are involved, but there's just not enough. Every year, the funding for sustainable farming practices runs out, and only a few farms get to experience the shift in this kind of farming practices. So it's really important that we organize to protect farmers so that they can actually do the kind of farming that they want and be sustainable and not have to be trapped in this exploitive and harmful and toxic industry that it seems right now that they have no choice to be in. We need to create better options so that everyone can be involved in a safe and healthy work and a safe and healthy world. Next slide. So, the time is now to reform our food systems, protect farmers, frontline communities, and future generations. Environmental racism is rampant in where they put a factory farm, who's living by these factory farms, the lack of regulation of factory farms and the lack of regulation of biogas and biomethane is because, who's living in these communities? Why don't our lawmakers about enforcing these regulations to protect those community members? We all need to think not in my backyard and really make sure that we strengthen the laws and policies so that this kind of polluting entities can be shut down and not expanded. It's an equity issue. It's a racial justice issue. It's health justice, disability justice. Farmers are having to pay more and produce more to potentially profit from biogas. That's not fair. We can all do better. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
I really want to thank you because, as you mentioned, this has been being done with dairy and swine, but poultry is kind of a new take on this.
Frontier. Yeah.